Hi, my name is Rashad Reedus, and I am here with Mr. John Hall. Today's date is April 1st, 2015, and this is let me start over. I did that all wrong. All right. Hi, my name is Rashad Reedus, and today's date is April 1st, 2015, and I'm on the Ball State campus as a member of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project, and I'm here with Mr. John Hall. How are you doing today, sir?
Fine, doing well.
Great. And I'm going to start off by asking, when and where were you born?
I was born in Shelbyville, Tennessee, November the 8th, 1946.
Ah, okay. And what was the environment like there for African Americans?
Shelbyville, Tennessee was approximately 50 miles from Pulaski, Tennessee. That's where the Klan first started. Shelbyville was about 5,000 in population there, two separate school systems, and I attended for the first 5 years the black school system there, Bedford County Training School.
So was the other school system a white school system?
Correct. Central High.
And you never attended that school system?
No. It integrated in 1964. And I left Shelbyville in 1957. We moved to Indiana. Mom thought that the schools were better here in Indiana.
Would you agree with your mother on that?
Yes. I would say that my brother and I had a very unique experience. My dad was in the military, and we got to travel to Bordeaux, France for a year and a half. And so I attended school on the Army base there. And that was probably my first experience with integration. So when we returned, Mom and Dad had broken up, and she was here in Indiana with her sisters in Indianapolis. She was taking a few courses at IUPUI and realized, in her opinion, the system there in Shelbyville was not as competitive, and wanted to move my brother and I north. And so 1957, we ended up in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay, you mentioned an experience of going to school in France and it being integrated. What was that like for you?
Real interesting. I think Bedford County Training School was a unique place. They are in history for winning 82 straight football games in a row, or not losing 82 straight games in a row. And so I had, that was listed in a newspaper maybe 25 years ago, that record. And Penn, here in Indiana, allegedly broke that record in the 80s. And so it was a very good school, even though the material was secondhand. And anyone that attended school in that time, especially in the South, would tell you that that's how the system was designed. But teachers were well equipped, and they pushed each student. So that was good. When we left for France, 1953, we lived right outside of Bordeaux in a little city called Carbon Blanc, and rode the school bus to the Army base, Camp Boussac, and that's where I attended school there with other Army officers' children. And so that was a very unique experience. Mom alleges that I would come home crying that first time. Now, I want you to know that's alleged. And the issue was that the European American kids would not play with me or, be around me. And so Mom probably gave me my first and probably my most important lesson. And that was, you take care of yourself. You learn to entertain yourself. You learn to compete with yourself. You do stuff for you. As long as you are taking care of yourself, learning yourself, entertaining yourself, you'll find friends. And sure enough, in midway through the year, I had developed a few friends. One was a major son, and we did a lot of recreation together. But that was a very good lesson for me to learn. I think the interesting piece about my time there, being from the South, all played a role. And I'll never forget, we were playing a game of hiding the eraser. And, you would say, oh, if a student was up and guessing the location, you would say, oh, you're close, or you're hot, or, you would sort of give them hints. And I remember saying to this young European-American lady, you're as cold as an ice bucket. Now, that's typically what we would say in Shelbyville, Tennessee, that you're not close. But the substitute teacher thought that I had made a derogatory remark and had me stand in the corner for the rest of the day. And so when the regular teacher got back, she said, John, what happened? And I didn't know. I didn't understand what was going on. And I said, well, we were playing this game, and I said this, she was colder than an ice bucket. And so she said, well, you go sit down now. But I realized as I got older that probably was looked upon as a derogatory remark, especially to this European-American little girl. And, I remembered that. But I believe what I gained from being in that setting was competition, being able to compete.
Okay, and what were your parents' names, and where were they from?
Lily Mae Garrett Hall is mom, and she was there in Shelbyville, Tennessee, Bedford County, and my dad is Raymond Hall. He was also from that area, around Bedford County, Tennessee.
And you just mentioned a while back that you went to this school with your siblings.
Yeah, my younger brother went there.
Do you only have, how many siblings do you have?
Just one brother, Bernard Hall, and he passed away in 2005. But he graduated from Michigan State.
So did religion play a significant role in your upbringing?
Definitely in my young age. Now, mind you, I didn't necessarily grasp it early, but grandmother, who was a very stable force in my brother and I's life, we had to go to Sunday school and church with my aunt, Lily Dean, every Sunday. And it was a dreadful time because Grandma would brush my hair, that's why I'm bald now, and get me ready for church. But that was a very early introduction, and I believe a good introduction for my brother and I to be exposed to religion.
So you mentioned that you moved to Indianapolis after France.
Yes.
How did you like it there?
In Indianapolis?
Yes.
Indianapolis, when I first moved in 1957, I attended an all-black elementary school, and I thought that it was good. And it was so funny to me that even my black teachers would say to me, "Where are you from?" My accent, that southern accent, would be there, real present. And so, but I had very good experience there, and I went from that black school, because it would only go to the 6th grade, and then I went to another one, School 87. And School 87 was a very good school. Strong principal, very disciplined, high expectations for students. Thought that was good. We were staying in my aunt's best friend's house, and she decided to move back from New York, and we had to move. And so my uncles, an amazing part in Shelbyville, Tennessee, put together $10,000 and bought a house in Center Township, not too far from where we were. But the part that I lift up, it was 6 blocks away from Shortridge High School, which at that time in 59, 60 was listed in several magazines as one of the top schools in the country. And so that I think was, a very positive element in my brother and I's career experience, to be exposed to competition at a school of that caliber, coming from Shelbyville, Tennessee, was very unique.
Did your parents purposely move to that location for you to attend Shortridge?
I don't believe so. Now, and I say that because Mom's sisters worked for 2 of the teachers in a domestic setting. But I never heard them talk about, we're going to move there for the school. And I know my uncles were not even aware of Shortridge High School. But, it's sort of great. I never heard them talk, but two of my aunts worked for 2 of the teachers there at Shortridge.
Was education stressed in your family?
Mom was the education guru. She attended Tennessee State for a year, got pregnant with me, and my dad was in the military, and so her desire was for both my brother and I to attend school and stress that. Now, my uncles were all self-made men. They raised me along with Mom and grandmother. They were brick masons and electricians, and they pushed a very hard work ethic and a saving ethic. And so, but Mom was the thrust on education.
You mentioned that your parents got a divorce upon your arrival in Indianapolis, I believe.
Well, when we moved back from France, they had split it up.
So did you see your father after that, or?
He wasn't engaged. He wasn't very engaged at all. But my uncles, I had a network of uncles and aunts and school and church and peers that we were all looking to do the same kinds of things.
Would you say those growing up without a father helped you, really made you mentally resilient?
I think that we probably didn't miss Dad. Dad was an alcoholic. He had planned to retire in the military. Dad has 5 Bronze Stars from 5 battles in World War II, and then he had more in Korea that I'm still researching. But Dad drank, and so I can remember telling him once, it's probably good that he wasn't around, because no telling what my brother and I, might have picked up, or it might not have been. And I told him that not in a mean way, and I think he understood what I was saying. But I would say that my grandmother and Mom and those uncles and aunts are the reason for both my brother and I having a resilience to complete task.
So what was your dream occupation as a child?
Probably a doctor. I think I majored in medical technology when I first came to Ball State, but wasn't ready to handle the higher science and math, So, but I think that's what I thought about. Mom always wanted my brother and I to do some sort of teaching. I didn't see that, and later on I thought law would be much more my fit, and that maybe I would teach a few years to get some money to go finish law school. So that was my thought.
Where and when did you graduate high school?
Graduated from Shortridge in 1964.
Were you involved in any clubs or activities, sports?
Ran a little track, played a little baseball, little, that's little, but sang in the top two choirs there at Short Ridge.
Did any of these experiences help prepare you for Ball State?
That's a interesting question that you ask. I can remember being in madrigals, and at that time there were 3 African Americans that integrated the Madrigal Singers in 1964. My girlfriend and I, and a close childhood friend, Roger Oliver. And we were sitting in rehearsal one evening, and our director, Tom Preble, said, "Okay, I want all of you to tell me where you're going to school." Well, even though Mom had talked about Tennessee State, I really hadn't thought about any plans. Mom had said to me, "I believe I can help you get through 1 year, but you're going to have to take care of the rest." So Mr. Preble's going around the room, and I'm hearing students say, "I'm going to Brown University." Well, I've never heard of Brown. Harvard, I had heard of that. So he was getting close to me. Now, my a cappella choir director was Don Newen, who directed choirs here at Ball State, and who had went to Ball State. He probably directed choirs here at Ball State afterwards. And Don Newen said in class one day he'd gone to Ball State and he'd had a good time. So it got close to me, and I said, "Well, I've got to have something." And I said, "Ball State." And nobody laughed. There was no difference. And he kept going around. So when I left out, I thought, you know what? I better find out about Ball State University and see what I need to do to apply. That's how I got to Ball State.
Did your mother approve of the choice of going to Ball State?
She never brought up Tennessee State. Ball State had the cardinal, which was my grandmother's luck symbol. Now, I didn't do this because of that. But Ball State had a good reputation as a teacher's college, which mom was kind of into that. So yeah, Ball State was a good choice.
Were there any other choices floating around in your mind?
Not really. I mean, as I think back, as you asked that question, not really. It was that spur of the moment sort of thing. Now, I had friends who were going elsewhere. They were going to black colleges. IU was heavy. But Don Newen said he had a good time. And and so I used that.
How prepared were you to go to Ball State?
I believe I was probably not prepared the best, but I think I was okay. My grades doesn't reflect that first year, but I think in most of the classes, I was probably average. Being away from home, meeting new friends, having freedom, that was all a good thing. I took full advantage of Ball State's extracurricular activities.
Can you tell me some of these extracurricular activities that you participated in?
The Debonair Club, a lot of intramural sports. And, the thing was, Ball State had, my roommate my first year was from Versailles, Indiana. And so he and I never had an argument. It was always over the heat in the room. He loved it freezing. My African ancestry, I had to have heat. And so we would go to the tally. We would go to the library. So I didn't get involved immediately in student government or fraternity kind of things. It was, my grades were not good enough for me to stretch out like that. But I had a pretty full schedule at Ball State. And when I say that, I mean, I kept busy.
What was your major at Ball State?
I've graduated with social sciences, concentration in American history, political science, minored in world civilization.
And you mentioned that you and your roommate would argue over the temperature. Was your roommate white?
Yes.
And how did you
sales in the attic?
And how did having a white roommate affect your experience at Ball State?
It was good. Struby was an extraordinary guy. We were, and the match might have been, he was from Versailles, very small southern town in Indiana, and my being from Shelbyville, Tennessee, there were things that I could relate to about him. He was definitely a country guy, and I'm a kind of a country guy too, but Ball State polished me up a little bit.
Do you still keep in contact or kept in contact after you graduated with your roommate?
With Bob Struby, it's an amazing thing. I was involved in politics at one time, and there was this young lady on the national scene, and whenever I would run into her, she kept saying, I know somebody that you don't even think I would know. And so one time we were together, and she said, do you know Bob Struby? And I said, Rooms? And she is from Versailles, Indiana. So she connected me with, or her daughters got a hold of her when Bob retired. And he invited me down to his retirement. That may have been 10, 12 years ago. And I went down and spoke at his retirement.
What was the black student community like when you arrived on campus?
Small, but very, very connected in the sense that in '64 there might have been maybe 100 African American students, and that's probably counting everybody, the janitors, it was a small community, but it was a close-knit sort of thing. I mean, Muncie is a middle America, and so I think the smallness at that time, I can remember there was one big fraternity here, the Kappas, and they would come and pick up new students, take them to dances, bring them home, encourage you to study, that kind of thing. So, it was a good network support kind of thing early when I got here to Ball State.
How many students would you say were from the local Muncie area?
I would guess that I'm thinking about those who were, coming from Muncie, coming here to school, not that they lived on campus. I'm going to guess 15, 20. That might be a little high, but I'm going to say that.
And you mentioned that the fraternities were very involved with the black students. Did you join a fraternity?
I did not.
And why was that?
I think the first year my grades were not up to par, and then when my grades weren't that good, I didn't have the money, so I left, got married, divorced, raising a son. So when I came back to Ball State, it wasn't about pledging. I'd already pledged.
Were you involved with any other organizations on campus?
The only time I think, because I worked, I commuted back and forth from Allison's for 3 years. But I can remember one time, this story, the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity and the Omega Psi Phi fraternity decided to divide up the weekend to have their parties in order to raise funds. And I can't remember, one took Friday night and one took Saturday night. And as we went through the quarter, it became sort of gray of who had what. And there was an altercation at one of the parks out in the city, Heacon or something. I can't remember. And so there was a fight. I believe if I remember, there may have been a fight. So and when I say we, I can't quite remember who all it was. It might have been members of both fraternities. We called together, and the Black Student Union, a campus-wide meeting in order to discuss this particular issue. Now, this had to be, I don't know, 68, 69 or something like that. And we put flyers out. Now, this is just my perception. Our purpose was to get African American students to get along and work this out. But I think Ball State felt this was something bigger. And there were undercover people, in my opinion, here on in the building, and I'm trying to think of the building. The building is behind the library. That's where we were. We were in the basement. And I bet you we had 200-300 people, that came, and I was one of the moderators. That's probably the only time that I remember taking an active role to be a part of some sort of solution.
Can you elaborate on the issue that caused all these people to gather?
Well, it was an altercation in the parks. One of the fraternities was taking both nights, and so there was a fight. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody was following the rules, that we get along, and that was the purpose of the gathering, the big meeting, was to talk it out among all the African American students.
You mentioned the fraternities working together. Was there times where they didn't work together and it was more of a rivalry?
It was competitive. Now, when I talk about working together, the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity was probably it was the predominant fraternity on campus. I think Alphas had one guy. There may have been one or two Sigmas. So that way people got along because there was only one dominant one. When there became two, and I think that was like 65, 66, then it became competitive. And it was friendly competitive, I think. But this particular incident went beyond, just competitive.
You mentioned that at Ball State, you thought Ball State had some undercover people at this meeting.
That's just my perception.
Do you feel that Ball State was friendly towards African Americans during this time period?
I do. But you got to understand, I mean, my background was from I had a Southern background. Muncie is even bigger than Shelbyville, Tennessee. Muncie, however, I mean, this was in the 60s. And so the atmosphere, Muncie's very conservative. And so you're not going to find, there were people here who had never been around African Americans. The city of Muncie is, pretty rigid. So you had that. But Ball State, in my opinion, allowed all of its students to feel their way. I can remember one student who we asked to come back and speak at one of the Black reunions, and he became a deputy U.S. attorney or assistant U.S. Attorney out of Fort Wayne. And he didn't want to come back to speak because his tenure here, he felt Ball State should have been more aggressive in opening up housing, in fighting maybe civil rights issues. And so when I came in '64, you could go to Pizza King in the front door. My attitude, and many of my partners, we wanted to get a degree, get an education, and then get out in society and try to make a living. I had friends who also, though, felt that there needed to be some social statement made, that, you know, we need to change things here. And that's good. That was good too. But I think Ball State meshed in with the times. And, you know, I give Ball State a very good passing grade on race relations. You know, was it the best? It was like America. You know, America was struggling with integration, with, you know, demands for equal participation. And Ball State was no different, but I think Ball State gave us an avenue to speak our voice.
Did you stay on campus your whole time at Ball State?
No. I stayed at Wagner my first year. And then when I returned, I stayed at Elliott Hall. Then I lived at the Roberts Hotel. That was a good deal, you know, for maybe a year and a half.
You said that you stayed at Elliott Hall. Did they have the ghost stories at that time?
Yeah. Ghost stories, and they had the Black Rose of Death when I was there. And 2 or 3 students got beat up or jumped, you know, but I didn't have any trouble with that.
What is the Black Rose of Death?
We never knew, you know. It was a nice little gimmick thing in my mind. You know, it started like the ghost stories, but that's what I remember. Now there may not be any other student on campus that remembers that, but I do.
The 4th floor of Elliott, the library, is usually treated as a social area. Was it treated like that during the time when you went there?
I don't recall that when I was at Elliott. I don't recall that. The only thing I recall about upstairs at Elliott, I think they allowed students up there at one time in the 60s, in 64, 65, 66. And that's all I remember.
So I know you had a white roommate, so you frequently interacted with a white student, or at least a white student. Would you say that other students, black students, interacted with white students significantly?
I think there were a percentage. Yeah.
Did you ever participate in, well, I should ask, were there any civil rights movements or protests on Ball State's campus that you participated in?
Not that I participated in, but there were. You know, my job was to complete school, and I was running behind. I was paying for my own courses, and you know, I knew what I was going to do. But yes, there were. I believe they marched to the president of the university. Maybe it was Emmons. Excuse me. They may have even marched downtown. But yeah, I mean, you know, we were like any other university campus. I mean, there were issues. There were issues, but I think we participated like all the other students.
You Your first year at Ball State marked the beginning of regular U.S. combat units going into Vietnam. What were your thoughts initially on the war?
My father being in the military, it was a scary thing. Because if your grades weren't good, you were going to go. But saying that, Ball State, if I can remember correctly, I don't believe you would have found very many African American students protesting the war.
Why do you say that?
Well, I think those here on campus had a purpose. I think it became more highlighted as the Vietnam War revved up, and they were drafting people left and right. I would say that that's when most students didn't want to go to fight a war that they may not come back.
Were you afraid of being drafted, or did you know someone who was
Oh,
drafted?
it was definitely tops on my mind. Yes.
In the fall of 1969, there was a protest on the campus about the Vietnam War. Do you know anything about that?
Probably not. You know, mind you, I'm commuting back and forth, so probably not. But I can remember, you know, protests about Kent State, and I'm sure about Vietnam.
What was your reaction to the Kent State shooting?
You know, very sad, very sad. However, I can remember being in the tally. Is there still a tally? Yeah. I mean, you know, where we would go eat hamburgers and play cards. But anyway, I can remember bringing up the fact to white students that they came to the tally to get black students to wear armbands to show protest about Kent State, other stuff. And I can remember a few of us bringing up the fact that, well, you know, you all have never participated in the boycotts of restaurants in South Carolina, those kinds of things. So why should we join you now? I remember us doing that.
What was their response when you asked them that question?
No trouble. And I don't think very many African American students wore bands.
In 1969, there was a shortfall of legislation for tuition for the 4 state universities. So tuition raised up. Did you see any protests about this?
I did. I didn't. And working at Allison's and commuting, the beauty was, you know, Mom had told me that Mom had went and she was a cook at Indiana Gear Works, and she went to Bank AFNB and got me $1,000 loan. Tuition and room and board at Ball State my first year was $995, something like that. But she had said she could only do this 1 year. Now, if I'd have kept my grades up, I could have gotten this loan every year. And not that it was the partying per se, but I wasn't able to keep my grades up. So but working at Allison's, they paid for probably 3/4 of my courses. So
you just mentioned partying. Were you...
Not me. Not me.
You were not a party animal?
Well, you know, we did attend a few. Do you need a specific number? Oh my God, you don't want that. Cubed.
When you did party, did you party with African American students, or was it really integrated?
African American students. We would party here on campus at the center, student center, and then in the parks, the Muncie parks, and then there was this debonair club where I think the Kappas had members or something, and so those were the places. Homecoming, there would be a party at one of the hotels downtown. I don't think it was the Roberts, but there was this big, huge hotel, and the dance floor would sink, and so, but yeah, mainly with the African American students. Now, when was this? 65. There were 3 students, myself, Victor Burson from Elkhart, Willie Coates from South Bend. We were getting $35 a night singing backup to a band out of Bedford, white band out of Bedford. And so we did at least, I know, 2 fraternity houses with the band.
How did you acquire that job as a backup singer for an all-white band?
That's a real good question. It may have been through Victor Burson, through Willie Coates, but this band, this white lead singer, was looking to do something a little unique, and so he had to probably have contacted one of them. But we traveled to Bedford one time and sang there at the Bedford High School prom, and I know we did the Sig Epps house or something, on Fraternity Row. Did 2 or 3 of those, and I think they figured out $35 going to these 3 African American guys. That's digging in deep to the overall pot. So it wrapped up, but for several months there was a lot of Pizza King going on.
You mentioned going into the local community sometimes to hang out. Did you interact with the Muncie locals often?
Yes, and yes and no, but yes. There were the Wilkins, and I believe they were taking classes here on campus, but they lived in Muncie. And they would come and take me fishing, and we hung out. Oh, it was real good. There was a guy who played saxophone, Eddie, can't call his last name now, but he was from Muncie and played on the Holiday Inn circuit, and so we hung real tough. So yeah, there were individuals that I befriended, and if we ran into each other today, we'd still be good friends.
Did you ever read the Ball State Daily News?
Probably not much. Maybe the pictures, but probably not much.
So what sort of classes did you take when you were attending Ball State?
Well, I started out, I mentioned about trying to do medical technology. And, I realized I was having to study extremely hard just to get a C. So I switched over to political science, American history, thinking law school might be a better route for me. I kind of liked that thought. And had real good professors that sparked interest in those classes.
Between 1968 and 1973, several new academic departments were created at Ball State. Did you like the idea of Ball State going from a teacher's college to a university?
Yes, yes. I mean, I think it it added value to the degree, and it placed us in the mix with everybody else in Indiana. IU, Purdue. Yeah, I thought it was a good move. I thought it was a good move.
Did you have a sense of pride being from Ball State? Like I guess a friendly competition with IU and Purdue?
Yes. I think Ball State, the climate and the atmosphere there during my period, and mind you, I had a long period because I worked trying to get through. But Ball State had in my mind, a very good reputation. Not only as a teacher's college, but it was a good, solid curriculum initiative going on here. So yeah, there was some good pride. Still do.
After Ball State, did you go immediately into the workforce?
I did. Matter of fact, I didn't even come back to March, and I wish I had of now. But I had a son, and I thought I better get into the workforce. So my first job after Ball State I was working at Allison's. That's right. And so they had laid me off, and I was able to. They paid me 85% of my salary, so I was able to come here on campus, and I'd stayed. That's when I stayed at the Roberts Hotel, but I finished up. So Allison's called me back, and I said, you know what? I want to learn how to buy steel. And they said, oh, because when I worked at Allison's, I did more Ball State than I did Allison's. I maybe would work 2 days a week. So they said, oh no, you're gonna have to pay your dues and get back. You're gonna have to go back out on the floor. So I had a teaching contract for $6,700 a year, and I was making much more at Allison's. And I thought to myself, if I can't buy steel, I went to teach school. So I started right away with a contract at Arsenal Technical High School. Unfortunately, they went on strike. That my first day to report, they were on strike. But started teaching right after Ball State.
Before we go into your first job, you mentioned that you had a son. Are you married?
No.
Did you get married while at Ball State or after Ball State?
I got married during Ball State. Yeah, during Ball State. Married for 6 months, and then divorced, and then came back, finished up.
And how many children do you have?
I have two. I have Michael Everett Hall, the firstborn. I have Stephen Alexander Trahan Miller. He's my youngest son. And then I have a nephew, my brother's son, Bernard Nathaniel Hall, Jr. My brother died, so he's like another son.
So before you received your degree, was employment readily available, or did it look kind of how it does for graduates now?
72, I believe there was a downturn when I finished up. However, though, the manufacturing side was beginning to pick back up. They called me back. But nothing like students face today. Easily, readily got a teaching contract. Although, the network that I had was good.
All right. And to your first job, how did you like your first job at Arsenal Tech?
I enjoyed teaching, and Arsenal Tech, when I started, had 6,000 students. And I did my student teaching at Tech. And also did some student teaching at Yorktown. That was a trip. But, and when I say trip, I mean, I did it, I taught a Latin class there at Yorktown. But Tech High School, urban core school, 6,000 students. It was my second year, I was probably ready to quit. But it became a very good training and learning experience for me. You mentioned student teaching at Yorktown. In the 1960s, there was an incident of a student who Yorktown didn't want that student teaching there just because he was black. Were you aware of that? I wasn't aware of that. That had to be 70 maybe that I did. I'm thinking 69, 70, probably 70, 71 that I did Tech in 71. So let's say 70 was Yorktown. But went okay. But I did elementary students or eighth grade. They were eighth graders, I believe, in Latin. But no, I wasn't aware of that. I knew, though, that I had to be very rare. Did being familiar with student teaching at Arsenal Tech help you transition into the job smoothly? Yes, very good. I had a good teacher who mentored me during that period. Ball State, I think, gave me the teaching principles. We were pushing concepts then, not specific dates and times and those kinds of things, but, concepts of history. And so that helped me with students who were out of the urban core, I felt. It helped me reach them and make the classes a little more interesting than just memorization. We would do a lot of little things that I picked up here at Ball State. So after teaching at Arsenal Tech, what was your next job? I left Tech and then went to Purdue, Indianapolis, and ran a minority engineering program for Purdue, Indianapolis that recruited African American men and women, European American women, to go into engineering as a career. So we had high school juniors and seniors that we would bring in for experiences in summer, expose them to computers, math, science, with professors there at IUPUI, and then hopefully they would stay at Purdue Indianapolis rather than go down to Purdue Lafayette. Did students usually choose to stay, or did they usually transfer? Purdue got the bulk, and probably the higher quality student per se. But as cost of schools went up, Purdue Indianapolis, got a good share, got a decent share. Do you feel that tuition and attending college altogether was more affordable in the past than it is now? I'm sure it is. As I mentioned, my first year here at Ball State was $900. And I can remember teaching class at Tech and saying to students, you ought to go to Ball State because it's very affordable. Until one student said to me, it's $6,000 to go to Ball State. And so, but I would say at that period of history, Ball State was probably competitive, but it was affordable in my mind.
And after your job at IUPUI, what was your next job?
My next job, that was, got involved in politics a little bit. So I went to work for U.S. Senator Richard Lugar, and I stayed with him for about 15 years.
How did you find yourself in that position as what was your position when working for him?
Working with Dick Lugar, I was his assistant state director. And, our basic piece was the portfolio here in Indiana, which covered business, education, those kinds of things, a lot of customer service stuff. But getting to Dick Lugar, here at Ball State, my last, I was trying to get out of here. So there was an opportunity on the board somewhere that you could go to work for a city and get 8 credit hours and $800. So, I was on that. So I wrote about 6, 7, 8 mayors, Hatcher and Gary, just around, and I wrote Dick Lugar in Indianapolis. The only staff that wrote me back was his staff. They did not have an opening, but they told me to stay involved. Here, while I was on campus, I'm kind of rambling a little bit. I had Phil Sharp, Congressman Phil Sharp, for about 8 or 9 political science classes, and just really enjoyed his stuff. So when I say we, there were local Muncie individuals, Conley. His last name was Conley. I think Amin or something, he was Muslim. We decided to run a candidate against the sheriff that was running for mayor here in Muncie. He didn't particularly care for his views. And there was a black Methodist minister here, Reverend Williams, I believe was his name, and this had to be 69 maybe, we set up phone banks here on campus. We worked the neighborhoods for him, and it was my first exposure. I had 101 politics, so I knew exactly what to do. And Kerry, who was the opponent, I'll never forget this as long as I live. Williams was running in the Democratic primary as an independent. And Kerry brought a flatbed truck with watermelons, bananas, greens into the black area, Whiteley. And my first impression was, well, black people aren't going to buy this. They're not going to go get this food just to get this vote, just to vote for him. They swamped the trucks. And it just pained me to my heart. And our candidate lost. Conley came to see me while I was at HUD before he died. He died not too long, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And so I brought up this campaign that we put together, and we were laughing about it. And I said, how bad did we lose? He said, we lost by 200 votes. So I give you that political story. So when I finished school, I volunteered for Dick Lugar on a campaign he had, just to volunteer. Liked his viewpoints, and and so he lost his first race. His second race, he won, but I didn't want any political kind of job, So I stayed teaching. But then when I went to work for him, the same people that I had interacted with when I volunteered, they were the ones who hired me.
So that networking and connection earlier on is what helped you acquire the job that you had then?
Yeah, I believe so.
And so after working with Mr. Lugar, is that when you transitioned from that from the assistant state director to the deputy mayor?
That is correct. I left Dick Lugar's office and then went to work for Steve Goldsmith as his deputy mayor of neighborhoods, and stayed with him 3 years. That was probably my most exciting time.
What was very exciting about that job?
Well, federal government, which I'm a part of now, I can write you a letter and email you, and we may not meet for a month or two. City government, if you're upset, you can be downtown in 15 minutes. And you can be up on the 25th floor rankling about your problem. And so you've got to be able to have some sort of reply, some sort of answer quickly and every day. So Steve Goldsmith was trying to reinvent government. And that was an exciting time, that trying to privatize some aspects of city government, look for better ways to run city government. So that period was just off the chain in terms of excitement, in terms of challenges. But his style was, he wanted us all to shoot the ball. I'll use that analogy. Working with Dick Lugar was more like a Bobby Knight designed offense. Everybody has a role to play, and you play by the book. Steve Goldsmith was run and shoot, and that was just such an exciting time.
What was your role as deputy mayor of neighborhoods exactly?
I was over the public housing arena. I was over economic development, and that was exciting times because we refinanced bonds, raised about $1 billion, and then we began to build houses, pave streets, do faith-based kinds of initiatives to try to strengthen neighborhoods, to build up leadership in neighborhoods that they could eventually rebel against the city on demanding things that they want. So it was a good opportunity. It was a good time.
Why did you leave that position as the deputy mayor?
The mayor decided not to run. And that is always he told me when I went over, he says, I'll give you 3 years. He said, I can promise you 3 years. And when we got to that third year, I think a few of us went to him. We said, look, one more time. I needed a few more years on my state pension. And so we were trying to talk. And so he set up headquarters, but his wife did not like Indianapolis. And at that time, President Bush called him to see if he wanted to get involved in federal government. So when he decided not to run, I had to find a job. And that was probably one of the first times that I had to look for a job.
Were you ambitious politically?
Oh, I would say when I left Ball State, I might have had visions of something, running for Congress maybe, running, for city council maybe, But after being involved in a few campaigns, you can come to a realization that, this may, the elected spot may not be what you want to do.
So what job did you end up finding after the mayor decided not to run?
The county executive at the Health and Hospital Corporation, which controls both Eskenazi Hospital and the public health department had a spot. He wanted me to come over and do neighborhood relations. And so I went to work for him for 3 years. And we worked on health issues, infant mortality, immunization, those kinds of things in neighborhoods in Indianapolis.
And after that job, is that when you found yourself at the housing and urban development
Correct.
position?
On the federal side, a good friend of mine, Luis Lopez, kept telling me that there was this opening at HUD that I ought to look at. And it was the director of HUD for Indiana. And I didn't think that, I wasn't that interested at that time. I thought, I'm here at county government, I'll finish up my time here. But as time went on, and my old boss didn't seem like he was going to be in that position a whole lot longer, I went online and filled out the application.
Can you elaborate on what is HUD?
HUD is the federal agency for housing. We provide funding for cities. There are 25 cities here in Indiana. And for public housing authorities, there are 61 public housing authorities. Public housing authorities provide housing for individuals who are 30% of the median family income, very low income individuals. They also have Section 8 vouchers that HUD pays 70% of the rent for individuals who qualify. Cities get funded through us to do housing-related issues. They can build houses, rehab houses. They can do economic development stuff, pave streets, sidewalks. In the rural areas, they buy fire trucks. And so we monitor the spending and the money that's issued out.
When you issued this money, did it go to the city to manage?
Yes, it's an automatic formula that goes to city governments, and there are 25 here in Indiana that's funded automatically, and it goes directly to the public housing authorities, and then we go in and monitor afterwards.
Have any of the money's been mismanaged?
There have been instances, yes. There will be individuals with the housing authorities that may spend the money on wrong things. There may be sometimes that there be individuals who will, take money. And so the check and balances are our staff and then the HUD Inspector General staff that monitors and watches. And there are systems in place that you can see how cities and housing authorities draw down their money. And so, there's a check and balance. But, yes, there can be those instances where people do not the right thing.
What are your plans for the future?
I want to work probably 3 more years and then retire.
All right, and I want to shift towards current events now.
Okay.
What do you think about our education system as a nation?
The educational system, I would give a good, strong C+, B- in general. But as we compete with China, India, Germany, France, a worldwide economy, that's where we may need to step up our game, especially with math and science, and being able to provide opportunities for students to work. In the future. When I came here to Ball State, manufacturing was still extremely strong. And so you could drop out of high school and earn $70,000, $80,000 a year working at a factory, Chrysler, Ford, Chevrolet. You can no longer do that. And so the challenge, I think, for the educational system in the nation now is how do we get those top students to be able to compete in a worldwide market? And then how do we close the gap with those who are far below the income wage level? How can our educational system improve to close that income gap between those who are not competitive?
Do you have a solution for these challenges?
Oh, I'd be making big money, if I did. I can remember one of the classes here at Ball State was Phil Sharp, and Senator Monahan had written a paper in '65 about the disintegration of black families and how this was going to be a huge problem in the future. And I can remember arguing in that class and feeling that there was, some, I didn't like the viewpoint that Professor Sharp had taken or other classmates, that this was going to happen. And I kept talking about the fact that even during slavery, African Americans wrapped around children that would be separated, that they would raise these kids themselves, that there was always a strong black family piece. But now, 50 years later, we see around the country families that are dysfunctional, fathers that are not engaged at all, and there's no network. And Senator Monahan had talked about there would be all of these youth unparented that would be predators. To me, that's what's going on. How do you solve that? How do you, which would be closing that income gap? How do you push even our top students to compete more? I think it is. I would argue that universities need to work closer with high schools and elementary schools to outline what is needed to compete and embed that in curriculum, and maybe give professors here at the university or any university extra credit, extra time, extra money to work on curriculums from elementaries on up, and not only academic but alternatives to academics, whether that's a trade, a skill, but I think it's going to take universities playing some role in designing the mechanism that will help us compete in a much stronger fashion.
Do you believe that there's a problem right now with African American culture?
I think there is a huge problem with the disconnect between those who believe in institutional racism and then those who would lean toward the cultural side of issues, the behavior side. I think there's a wide disconnect in that when I came to Ball State in '64, the job market was tough for minorities, people of color, in the sense that things were just beginning to open up with legislation, with protests, with riots. Things were just beginning to open up. In 2015, the marketplace is, it's still, racism will always be with us, but it's much more open. It's much more abiding to anyone with skills. the issue in African American culture is, how do we get these disintegrated families to get young people to gain skills and the ability to either go to college or to get a career in a skilled area? To me, that's the disconnect, and that's a huge issue. And it's not only an African American piece now. I mean, this whole behavioral piece is cutting through all cultures.
What are your thoughts on the recent media exposure that police have been getting from such events such as Ferguson or what happened in Staten Island?
The issue with police is always with African American males, probably something that they have to think about. However, when you look at a city like Ferguson, and they talked about 50% unemployment, but when you dig, you drill down deeper than that, individuals now are working in the underground economy. They're either moving drugs, stealing cars, dealing with hot goods. So in the 60s, you may have had a riot because people don't have income or there's not opportunities. But you're not having riots now because even with a 50% unemployment rate, young people are doing something. And so you take a city like Ferguson where the underground economy, I believe, is picking up that 50% or some of it. You have a 67% African American population, but you only have 3 members on the police force. You don't have but 1 member on the city council. Those are issues that reach beyond the police. The issue there is both the behavior of police and the behavior of the residents, the people of color that live there. In Indianapolis, there is a dialogue between faith-based groups and community groups to try to do community policing. There's leadership that is trying to work towards inclusion in terms of the police force. There's a black police chief. There's commanders. It's not a perfect system. There's still tension. But it's that kind of engagement that was missing when I saw the first shot at Ferguson. There was no engagement of police and the community to have any kind of dialogue that's positive. It's more arrest and ticket. However, that tension is there because there's that lack of communication, and there's that lack when you have children that don't have fathers, that don't have family structures to teach discipline, to teach behavior skills. There will be trouble. There will be trouble with understanding authority and understanding the role of the police. The police are not to settle your case. The police are there to enforce the law. So if you're breaking the law, whether you believe it's right or not, there's going to be that tension. If you're breaking the law and then you think you can settle it with this police officer, that's not his job or her job.
Speaking of enforcing the law, you mentioned the underground economy in Ferguson, which I assume is like drugs, whatnot. What are your thoughts on the war on drugs?
They spent a whole bunch of money. We spent a lot of money on the war on drugs. I think they're experimenting now in Colorado with legalizing drugs to a degree there, and maybe a few other states. It has been a crippler to low-income families, this whole drug culture. Your music, your video games, the thug lifestyle has been such a detriment. Lifting up drugs, lifting up that whole lifestyle. The war on poverty, I don't believe, has curtailed a great deal of drug use. And so the question I would have would be, with all these resources, is there other strategies we can use to get young people and families more focused on making a living rather than becoming addicted or dependent upon that drug culture?
Across the nation, many police departments have started using body cameras, but a lot of people feel like that it's not really going to help because, cops can sometimes just turn them off or switch them on when they want. Do you feel that our justice system needs to be reformed in some ways?
I think our justice system is always evolving. I drove back and forth to Ball State 2 or 3 years, going through 32, Yorktown, Daleville. I was stopped one time with a tail light out. The officer was very, very nice. I've had bad experiences also. I think that the relationship between police and anyone is always going to be a tense kind of piece. I've raised my sons and my nephew to always obey the commands. And I can get you out of jail. I can't get you out of the grave. But is that message still good for today? Yeah, I think so. And I think many young African Americans misunderstand what police are there to do. Or is there racism? It will always be. But I think as we have evolved in time, that cameras and training has improved relationships where the community is engaged. And you have leadership in that community that is focusing on the behavior of both police and residents. And that's where I think work has to be done, is to engage leadership in the community to ensure and check how police are working.
A recently hot issue is the Indiana Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Do you believe that this act is about liberty or about discriminating against gays?
I believe that this piece of legislation was not done with an intention of protecting everybody in Indiana. I do understand that the faith-based community wants or has asked for protection in the courts with religious freedom. But if you're going to have that, and I don't have any problem with that, but then you have to be able to then say that this is not going to be used to discriminate against anybody. And so, you know, if Indiana is going to fix this piece, there's got to be language that ensures that everybody is going to be protected under the law. Did our governor realize the backlash that would happen? I've heard him say he didn't think he was surprised, and that, you know, in other states they've adopted a law similar. I think Indiana's law is a little different, and the fact that Indiana doesn't have a protection for the LGBT community adds fuel to the fire that not everybody was being thought about when this bill was signed.
All right, sir. Before we conclude this interview, is there anything you'd like to share about your life, career, or experiences?
I would just like to say that I think Ball State provided me an opportunity to travel the world, be in jobs that I never dreamed of while I was here at school. And I'm very appreciative of that. I think I've met friends that I'm still friends with for life here at Ball State. So I want to say to those professors who probably thought I wasn't going to make it, thank you, and thank you all for doing this interview.
All right, sir. Well, on behalf of the Ball State University African American Oral Alumni History Project, I want to thank you for your help, and yeah, thank you very much.
Great.